background. Your beloved Cindy, I met at the ATA convention in April earlier this year. And she was the first person I heard her pipe up in the middle of a CDC presentation and said, well, do you know why all this is happening? And then I heard Cindy's presentation and I said, oh my God, this makes sense, finally. Or it's starting to make sense. After I've been here now, it makes a lot more sense. But we've seen an astonishing level of volume of rescue, so-called rescue dogs, I say, and cats that we've been experiencing in New York and New Jersey ports, but apparently also across the country. And you know, as a business person, I was kind of upset about it for two reasons. One is, as a business person, I was having to, on the spur of a moment, deal with 70 or 80 animals coming into the facility, and I didn't have the staff or the capability of, you know, quickly and efficiently handling them. And two, from a, you know, kind of from a moral perspective, you were seeing things that were clearly wrong, and, you know, what can you do about it? Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the rescue situation a little bit later, but I also feel it's important to provide a little bit of context. And so I'd like to introduce you to the ARC at JFK, and which we developed. How come this is not moving forward? Is there a button? No, maybe it's not on. I can't see the on button. Thank you. Anyway, we developed the ARC at JFK based on the concept of providing a structured approach to supporting animals traveling by air as live animal cargo, which is affectionately called AVI. However, our experiences over the past 3 years since we've opened have underscored the pressing need for evaluation, care, quarantine facilities, particularly at the major ports of entry. And these experiences also strongly suggest that it's really critical to catalog the documentation of any animal coming into the United States and evaluating the health of those animals. Currently, and also just to track data. You know, I'm a big data person, and I actually was trying to develop or find data for this presentation to show how critical this all is, and there really isn't any data. I went to Customs, and they said, well, we track only cargo animals coming in, and we only track airway bills. So you could have 80 animals on a single airway bill, so the data isn't really accurate. Anyway, and that doesn't even count animals driving into the country over borders. So, a personal anecdote, when we began this endeavor, I wasn't even going to be involved. And I really thought, animals, everybody loves animals. It's not political. I'm not going to have to deal with any politics. Instead, I found a really political landscape. You know, we're dealing with airlines that no longer want to transport animals at all. We're dealing with state and local legislators now that I'm trying to provide them information because they get a sound bite. We've heard all about those sound bites from PETA or somebody else, and they're asked to vote on a piece of legislation, and they don't have any information. And so now I'm lobbying. And we also have reporters. So when I do want to get my word out, I go to reporters. I have a PR company. And I want to talk about rescues and some of the challenges that we're facing, and they're like, no, we only want to hear about animals and good things and about rescues, and they don't want to hear any of the bad stuff. So, hence, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Oh, thank you. You know, another thing that we faced when we were developing the concept was consultants that were telling us, no, you shouldn't deal with laboratory animals at all because you're just going to get picketed and there's dangers associated with that. I didn't know any better. So initially we didn't work with any lab animals, and now we do, after I learned all the information. So anyway, who are we? Well, first and foremost, the ARC is its people. And I feel passionate about my people. So these are their faces. They're all really great people. These are the ARC ambassadors. We go out throughout the airport and advocate for animals in transport. And Tucker's my dog there on the right. Aiden is our director of companion animals. He was a former service, or was in training to be a service dog, and then he was rejected from that. Anyway, who we are. committed to the concept of providing the best possible treatment for animals in our care, but we also are also required and want to ensure the safety and security of our air transportation system and the biosecurity of our country. So it's a really unique juxtaposition and very difficult to hire people for these things. It's really a true public-private partnership. So we hire individuals that are with significant expertise in their disciplines, but before they walk in the door, they have to have a background check to make sure that they don't have any criminal history or anything that would prevent them from being able to access secure areas of the airport. But we also have a lot of training that we provide for all of our employees once they arrive. They have to learn about IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association. It's an airline-based organization, and we have to deal with the live animal regulations. So if we don't know the live animal regulations, then we can't transport animals. We have to know about dangerous goods, believe it or not. IPATA, which is the International Pet Shipping, they have got a lot of training that we provide. New York City Department of Health, lots of things. So where are we? That little, I don't know if you can see it, the chevron-shaped building, we're directly on the ramp or the active runway of JFK, which enables us to go directly to planes and also to the back of cargo facilities to help with animals. So what is the ARC? It's an elaborate logistics operation. It's more than just a building. We have several different disciplines. Equine export is a rest stall with 23 separate stalls for horses that are going to be exported. We have equine import and quarantine, 48 stalls, each individually controlled and filtered. We have in-transit holding. It's for commercial shipments of birds, reptiles, exotics, laboratory animals. The ARC Pet Oasis, which is all the companion animals, anything domestic pets. Ground handling operation, something I didn't really think about, but how do you get animals to and from the planes or to and from the cargo facility? You need ground handlers, and we needed a fleet of vehicles. And we have the National Organization of Animal Handlers, which is actually a separate 501c3 corporation that's promoting the safe and humane transportation of animals. Right now, it's actually owned by its members, so it's not owned by us, and we use that for the grooms that go with the horses from the facility to the aircraft to make sure that they're safe and happy. So here's just some quick pictures of our equine import quarantine stalls. Everybody hears quarantine and thinks it's really scary, and we try to show the happy side of it. So this is one of our staff working with the horses, and you can see how happy the horses are. They're laying down. This is the equine export barn, ground handling, and ARC Pet Oasis. As you can see with the van there, we were right next to the Kenya Air flight. NOAA grooms. This is a critical part of what we are. We're a bonded container freight station. I didn't even know what that was. It took me a long time to understand what it was. But a container freight station means that we have a bonded area within our facility that nobody else can access. And so if you have an uncleared animal that hasn't attained release status, they can come into our facility and we won't release it. We have to pledge to Customs we're not going to release any of that cargo before it gets cleared. So we had to post a rather sizable bond with Customs and Border Protection in order to do that. The good part about it is that lets us get the animals a lot faster. So instead of having to wait in a cargo facility, we get them right away. And everybody's still awake here. Yeah, we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays, weekends. And this shows one of our employees kind of falling asleep in one of the pet stalls. We do have some public hours, but we're pretty much always here. So, oops. So why is there did we get the wrong? It jumped, yeah. Why is there a need for this? Well, animal welfare goes without saying. If you don't have a facility to take care of animals and they're traveling and they have a problem, well, what happens to them? A couple things that kind of occurred to us or we worked into were national security. Actually, exports have to be free from dangerous goods when they're traveling. Regulation of imports, there can be smuggled goods that come in either inside an animal, sadly, or in their crate. I think everybody's seen some of the things that have happened. They build false bottoms in animal crates and they find drugs in them. Also, the security of personnel allowed out on the active runway. You don't want a person that isn't of good character being right near an airplane and potentially blowing it up. Kind of on this note, I received a call from our local FBI agent at the airport, and he says, well, you know, we'd like to come and talk with you about your facility and provide you some information. I said, well, okay, what's this about? And he said, well, a veterinarian's coming. He said, I bet you didn't know veterinarians work for the FBI. And I said, no, I didn't. I said, well, what division is this? He said, this is weapons of mass destruction. And I said, we deal with animals. What could that be? So they did come, and it was, I told Patty about this gentleman, and I hope he's here next year to speak to you all, because he gave a really, really fascinating presentation. And so he talked about agroterrorism, and he talked about the introduction of all sorts of foreign agents that could come in with animals or in the animal's waste. He talked about there's manufactured diseases in certain countries that are adverse to the United States interest, and they have a long incubation time, and their concern is that we bring in animals like that, and then they corrupt our crops or our agriculture. The food and hay, how has vectors where they can blow away, and if that's not contained in a facility and properly disposed of, it could affect the United States as well. So the other thing that's important is promotion of free trade, and that involves consistency. And if cargo are not handled consistently across the United States at all ports of entry, it makes it difficult for people to have a free flow of trade. It's kind of important to note here that the United States has the weakest regulations when it comes to the importation of particularly companion animals. I did leave out a little bit public health. People are animals too, and with all the pets coming into the United States and the way people have anthropomorphized their animals, they're part of your family, and if they have a disease, you're going to get that disease. So, factors affecting animal transportation. I kind of have to talk about this. It's really complicated, and I beg your patience with me. Commercial shipments versus personal property, aka pets. It's a big distinction when you're importing animals. Commercial shipments refer to any kind of trade reason to transport an animal. Animals imported for sale, animals imported for zoos, or even research. Those have to come through as a commercial shipment with a manifest, and the documents have to be reviewed. They have to use a customs broker. Personal property is your own personal pet. It's not an organization's personal pet. It's a personal pet, your own personal pet. And we'll get to why it's important in a little bit. In-cabin versus excess baggage and manifest cargo. So animals, particularly companion animals, can travel either in cabin with you if they're small enough, or if they're an emotional support or service animal. Excess baggage only exists for certain airlines, but you can effectively check your animal as a piece of baggage, and it can travel on the same plane as you, but you're responsible. It's still your personal property. There's no government oversight over excess baggage. Manifest cargo is the way all animals used to travel until about 20 years or so ago, and that's in the cargo hold. So rescue imports, I believe, should always be classified as commercial shipments, and that enables Customs, CDC, and USDA to actually track any animal coming into the United States. There's documents on it, and if there's ever an issue going forward, they can go back to those documents and find out where the animal has been and where it was intended to go. Unfortunately, the USDA doesn't really have any means of enforcing its import requirements, which are more extensive than CDC's. So, I'll go back here. Some other factors that can affect animal transportation are things like the aircraft. Not all aircraft have the capability of taking live animal cargo. The cargo hold is not temperature controlled. A change of aircraft in the middle of before a flight or in the middle of a journey can affect your animal's transportation, because if there was a layover and now they bring in a plane that doesn't take live animals, what happens to your animal? If there's no animal care facility, there's no place for that animal to go. There's also constraints on commingling of species. One of my first educations on this was we had a Korean rescue group. It was our first guest into the Ark, and 3 of the dogs had to return back to Korea because they didn't meet the standards for entry. And so we were trying to send these dogs back, and I was working with the Korean cargo agent, and they kept putting me off, and she called me up again, and she said, okay, he's got to wait again. We have lobsters on the plane. I said, well, what, are lobsters and dogs not compatible? And she said, no, they're not, because lobsters have to be kept cold and dogs have to be kept warm. So I learned all about that. So there's also, right now, I'm calling it the perfect storm. So what we have is there's very low profit margin for the airlines to transport animals. Plus, they have a significant risk associated with transporting animals because of all the social media experiences that they've had. You know, someone's sitting on a plane and they see the dog in the hot sunlight and they take a picture of it and they post it. They put it on Twitter while they're sitting in the plane. And all these things make airlines far less welcoming to the thought of providing air transportation for animals and cargo. There can be escapes. So all sorts of things that have affected airlines. On the other hand, you've got record pet ownership. I think I read that some 70% of households own pets, and 60% of those have 2 or more pets. And all those pet parents travel. And particularly with the younger generations coming along, all of those people expect to be able to travel with their pets. So you've got a situation now where your supply is diminishing. The requirements for travel and regulations and what we have to do to put an animal on a plane are going like this, and you've got demand going like that. So it's just a recipe for anxiety, high cost, and all sorts of issues to happen. So what do you expect? People are, in record numbers classifying their animals as either service dogs and emotional support animals to get them on the plane with them, because they can't afford to put their animals in cargo. A typical shipment of an animal, a pet, from New York to Florida could cost as much as $5,000. So it's a lot of money. If you're traveling regularly back and forth, it's a logical response. It's not someone doing anything really horrible morally. They're just trying to respond to the situation that they're dealt with. And this extreme loophole is really the one that the rescues are exploiting. Those are the CDC requirements for entry. I know you can't read it, but on the left are the New York State requirements for entry, which are a lot more severe and secure than what CDC requires. However, again, there's no means of enforcing the New York State requirements. This just kind of shows you how long it can take you to ship your animal. Sometimes your preparation might have to be up to a year in advance if they're traveling as cargo. And then even on a particular shipment, from the time your animal, you're leaving your home to when it gets to its actual destination can take 24 to 48 hours. And even the time that the animal is spending at the airport before flight is 6 or more hours, and then after the flight arrives, it can be another 4 to 6 or 8 hours. So it's a real problem. The other thing that's happened in air transportation is that airlines have now subcontracted out their cargo operations to ground handling agents and the sale of their cargo to general service agents. And so when you have a problem, you don't even have a person to go to. especially, it's difficult for us working at the airport, and it's difficult for shippers, but if you're a retail individual and you're trying to resolve a problem relative to your animal, it's next to impossible. So what could go wrong? It turns out a lot can go wrong. Fortunately, it doesn't go wrong very often. But these are some of the things that happen: flight cancellations, delays, a snowstorm comes, what are happening to the animals? Documentation errors happen very frequently. Different airlines also have different ways of handling their cargo, their documentation packets. Some put them on the crates, some put them into packages, and these get lost all the time. The transit to and from the aircraft is, if it's not done properly, which it's usually not, are in those dollies that you see your luggage go out on. Sometimes some airlines have a temperature-controlled vehicle. Lack of environmental control. We had a situation, like I said, my husband's a great crisis manager. We got a frantic call from an airline that was transporting honeybees. And they said the bees are escaping. and nobody, I mean, I guess honeybees are not the ones that sting, but these bees are escaping, and all the ground handlers, are going crazy because they think they're going to get bit by bees and they're allergic, and so they call us up, would you come please deal with these bees? So we go, John actually goes out with the ground handlers and he picks up this crate of bees, and there's all the instructions are in Spanish. Nobody can read it. And what did the instructions say? Keep cool. But they didn't even define the temperature range. So nobody knew what cool was. Was cool 50 degrees, 40 degrees? Well, it was 80 degrees outside. All those bees were in hibernation, they were being kept cool. It got warm, they all escaped. So we had to resecure the crates and send them on. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I don't think that shipper wanted to ship bees again because it was a test shipment. So anyway, there can be an inspection authority that holds up your animal. Animals often become compromised or injured, brachycephalic breeds we've all heard about. They don't have appropriate water or food. An anxious dog, an upset dog can eat right through a crate and they can escape. There are language barriers we already talked about. Lack of knowledge. Somebody that finds an animal or decides they want to bring an animal into the United States, they don't know the requirements and they get stuck. There's differing treatments of service animals. So the bottom line, all these factors create anxiety and increased costs. So these are just a few kind of things that have happened to some of the animals that we've seen. This little animal on the far left was a Pomeranian coming from Russia, and it was sitting it wasn't shipped, and they didn't transfer the animal to us immediately. It was sitting in the cargo warehouse for 6 hours. That dog didn't even weigh 5 pounds. And it was nearly dead when we found it. I think another 15 minutes and it would have been dead. So we got the veterinarian involved, and it was way too hot. It was 90 degrees outside, and it was sitting in a cargo warehouse at 90 degrees inside. This dog hurt its leg in transit. The other one, the far right, she hurt her eye. Horses is another area that can go really bad. And I know it's really hard for you to imagine, but 3 horses get shipped in a stall that's about the length of this, or the width of this table here. And horses get upset, just like small animals. This one flipped himself over on his back. These two on the right were horses that got so upset that they tried to escape, and they jumped over the barrier, and that was the barrier stuck up against this horse's stomach. We're the only airport that has the ability to handle horses immediately and not have to take them off site. There's some examples of crates where animals have either bitten through or it's been damaged, dropped, something like that. So that brings me to the rescues. I like to call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not like PETA, the worst, the bad, the worst, and the worst. So the good. We call them responsible rescues. They include animals, rescue organizations that are dedicated to helping enlisted service people bringing their animals that they own back to the United States. There's some breed-specific rescues that we work with, and there's some other well-run, well-organized operations that got into the good care category with a little coaching from us. They generally attend to all the best practices. They pre-quarantine before the animals leave whatever country that they're in. They actually really care about the animals. And they always follow the rules. They get a customs broker. If they do travel in cabin, they've got power of attorneys and from the end owner of the animals to say that they're allowed to travel with this animal on behalf of the rescue organization. Second category I call bad to the bone. These importers are illegitimate and they know it. They include sellers and breeders that are basically masquerading as rescues. They bring in animals to the country and sell them for thousands of dollars. They're exploiting that loophole of being able to declare an animal as a personal animal if you bring it through the passenger terminal. Customs and Border Protection trains their cargo agents on how to evaluate documents, but they can't train every single agent that works in a passenger terminal to evaluate a situation. So what was happening is rescues were bringing animals in cabin, but also in excess baggage, up to 70 or 80 at a time. And what I've talked to a number of people here. Imagine the situation. A freighter comes in from China. Animals have been traveling for 30 hours, and there's 70 crates, and they get unloaded as just like your excess baggage. So it goes into the passenger terminal, it comes up it does go into oversized baggage. It doesn't generally come out on the carrels for the baggage. So you now have these crates of dogs that have been traveling. They're barking, they smell, and you have a very irate individual across from the customs agent saying, "I'm a rescue. You don't have, you can't stop me. I'm doing something good." And they're advocating and they're arguing, and then there's 20 other people around them saying, "Oh, this is a rescue group. Let them go. They're doing something good." So what happens is all these animals, a lot with diseases and other issues, improper documentation, they're flooding into the country. At JFK, it's a little different because once we opened there, both Customs and CDC had a place where the animals were going to be kept safe and secure and could be examined at a more leisurely pace along with the documentation. Anyway, what I find interesting about this is if the U.S. has closed down so many domestic breeders and retailers over care concern, why on earth do we want to import animals from even worse conditions? But that's just me. So also in this category are ad hoc groups of individuals and animal rights activists that manage to organize themselves into some form of a charitable organization. They throw up a website or a GoFundMe page and they claim to expose all the atrocities that are happening in other countries, in places like China and Korea with Eat the Dogs. And they put up these horrible pictures and they get lots of money, and then they come into the United States. And we see them, we were seeing a lot more, but we see a lot of them because they get stopped in the passenger terminal, or when someone looks at their documents and realizes that they're not correct, and they get transferred to us, and it's a bonded facility. These groups are characterized by a complete disregard for regulations and authority. How dare you stop me? They're hostile, angry, abusive, and they are very quick to threaten legal action and post negative commentary. We've had people do a sit down right in front of our building. I think if I go back, you can see right there in our office. And they film right in front of the entrance to our facility. And they're filming live and talking about how horrible we are for holding these dogs. They should be released immediately, and we're mistreating them. And if you saw some of the pictures of our facility, you can see it's very clean, and we disinfect after each animal. It's the cleanest kennel you've ever seen. In fact, Customs and Border Protection and Fish and Wildlife house their working dogs with us when they're in the middle of operations. So they're not going to allow animals to go into a facility that they don't feel is quality. We've had situations of foreign nationals visiting the United States. And we find this out because they have to list what their address is in the United States, and I look it up, it's a hotel. And they're bringing 5 and 6 animals from Ukraine, Russia, and selling them. So it's a complete masquerade. It's a fraud. And they're selling these animals for thousands of dollars. We had a flight attendant at one point, I'll get into that, that's the ugly. So the ugly really aren't any better than the bad. These include flight volunteers. So a rescue organization, I'm sure you've all seen it, if you go on just about any rescue organization's website, there'll be a tab that says, how can you help? And the number one, how can you help, is be a flight volunteer. A flight volunteer has no business traveling with rescue animals. They're accepting responsibility for, when they travel with an animal, they're accepting responsibility for not only the care and treatment of that animal, but also for any kind of financial responsibility that goes with it. So if animals are transferred to us, the cost of our facility gets assessed to that passenger. So a flight volunteer is clearly confused, and I've told this story a couple times, but what typically happens is a young college student whose heart is breaking over rescue animals gets approached, and they say, are you going to the United States? Yes. They're often foreign, and they bring in 3 or 5 dogs, and the customs officer sees them with the kennels of dogs and says, oh, are these your pets? And they've been instructed, yes, these are my pets. These are my own pets. And so the customs officer says, oh, what are you doing in the United States? I'm going to school. Where? Rutgers. Where do you live? A dorm. I didn't know they allowed dogs in dorms. So this happens every day. Another interesting situation is, even for the dogs in cargo, they still have to be cleared, so individuals will go to the customs office to clear their dogs. And they present their own ID because they have to do that to prove that they're the owner of the dog. Customs officer looks at it and says, oh, your visa's expired. You've overstayed your welcome. The people get deported. Unfortunately, the animals don't. They're stuck in my facility in nowhere land, and then we have to work out that. Anyway, here's some of the pictures. This one on the far left, they put 4 cats in it. They called it a cat condo kennel. And this lady from Egypt, of all places, was bringing in every week. She was flying with these cats, and sometimes up to 40 animals at a time. And she created this, and she was really proud of herself, but you can see that the crate isn't even properly secured. And those were out in the passenger terminal where children could stick their little fingers in. The side, the middle one is a situation of that dog is way too big for that kennel. Now, these are rescue groups. They're supposed to care about their animals. And sometimes they'll have 2 and 3 dogs in a kennel that size that the kennels are way too small for the dogs. This little dog, it looked really sweet, but it was really nasty. And so no one had evaluated that dog before it left China. And so now it's here. Is that animal actually going to be adoptable? So I've talked to shelters on Long Island, and no-kill shelters, and they're actually upset about this because their position is all these rescue groups are coming in. It's a private shelter. All these rescue groups are bringing animals in. They adopt them out right away, literally on the airport property. People show up to pick up their new pets, and then they discover the animal has a disease, the animal is sick, the animal's got behavior problems. What do? They drop it back at the shelters. So now the shelters are overcrowded with these effectively unadoptable dogs. And this woman that I work with now has to find trainers to train the dog, or places that they can put these animals without having to euthanize them. So how did the rescues accomplish this importation? Like I said, they figured out that it's really much easier and cheaper to transport dogs and claim them as personal property. And like I said, many of them are taking advantage of the skyrocketing demand for certain breeds, French Bulldogs being one. We see a lot of Pomeranians. We see the little Maltese dogs, a lot of the miniaturized dogs. And some of the veterinarians have explained to me, how do you get them miniaturized, which I'm sure you all know, but I didn't, that they actually have to take those dogs before their time from the mother with a C-section. And so again, there's a whole aspect of care and also what's going to be the future health of those dogs. I know I'm rambling. I'm sorry. So the shipper or the rescuer or whoever it is, so on an airway bill or in the passenger, that person is the shipper, and they can ship as many as 80, like I said, many as 80 crates for a very long journey. And they come from Asia. We've seen Asia, Korea, the Middle East. We see Kuwait dogs. A lot of them are those desert dogs, and they're actually not domesticated animals. They're maybe half domesticated and half feral. Eastern Europe a lot, Russia and Ukraine, both cats and dogs. And also the Sphinx cats are the other big breed that we see coming in a lot. I don't really believe that the ends justify the means. I just sent, and I hope Patty will put it up on the website, an article that just came out by a Dr. Amanda Dykstra. She's a veterinarian, and she wrote an article about rescues, and should this rescue have been transported? And she talks about things that she's seen, cats that were ill and had to be euthanized for $2,500 after they arrived here. So it's just not the right thing. Anyway, I talked about they clear immigration, they retrieve the animals, they clear customs. We created, here's some of the examples, Iowa puppy laundering. This is another example. The Kansas department found these dogs that were, they went into Canada and then drove over the US border. On the last one, this was one of the social media attacks that we endured. A lot of these cats had the feline leukemia, and they tried to blame it on us. How did that happen? And then they had to have a GoFundMe, so they're begging people on social media to send money to them to save these animals. So at most ports, little can really be done, other than JFK, where we can do something, but really little. At most ports, there's no animal care facility. There's no means for Customs or CDC to take any kind of action, because any kind of action really requires, CDC's only law enforcement tool is to send the animals back. And when we first opened, I'm thinking that's a really cruel thing to do, which it is. But on the other hand, that's the only option that they have, and if they don't send them back, more and more and more are going to continue to come in. So I like to say the good guys are the bad guys and the bad guys are the good guys. So everybody thought law enforcement was doing the wrong thing by these animals, but in fact, they're doing the only thing that they can do to prevent a public health crisis or an agricultural crisis here in the United States. The other option, the other law enforcement option, is Customs and Border Protection can declare what is a commercial shipment to be a personal shipment to be a commercial shipment, which means that that shipment has to go from a clearance in the passenger terminal with no documentation. It has to be post-entered into cargo and then cleared appropriately. That costs a lot of money, especially if you're not expecting it. It's maybe, and it can cost anywhere from $500 to $1,000 at the last minute. So in that case, it's kind of a deterrent, because if you're not expecting to spend $1,000 and you're bringing an animal in under illegal or not illegal, improper kind of purposes, then if the more they do that, the more it will stop. So we actually worked with Customs and CDC to create kind of a hybrid clearance program for some of the what we call responsible rescues, who are trying to bring in larger number of animals, and they can't, because of their limited funding, really couldn't afford to use the cargo option. Also, certain countries don't allow, or the U.S. doesn't allow importation from certain countries, so the passenger option is the only thing. So similar to what you would see for if a jeweler or perishable, caviar, they've created another category of clearance for live animals that's arranged in advance. And so somebody that's trying to import into the United States contacts a customs broker in advance, submits the USDA importation certificate, submits all the veterinary records, and when the passenger arrives, they just go to the ship's office and get that cleared. So it's something that we did at the JFK port, and I know Customs is trying to work to spread that out to other ports as well. However, I really think that the net result of all of those efforts is that people are just taking their dogs to other ports. And I've talked to a number of people, it's Dulles, it's Miami, Atlanta, Detroit, LA, Boston, and unless CDC can organize like a sting operation for a few weeks in a row, that's the reaction, because it's available to them. Challenges and opportunities. So I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but I firmly believe that an animal care facility needs to be available at all major airports. Otherwise, you can't deal with those emergencies that I showed you, and you also can't effectively evaluate documents calmly in a situation where you're not under a lot of pressure. There needs to be an ability to conduct responsible animal shipments. The recognition of a need for animal travel on the part of the airlines. Like I said before, it's the perfect storm. You've got airlines are saying, I don't want to travel. I meet with them all the time. Cindy was there in Budapest when we talked at the ATA convention, and their position is, like the head of American Airlines is an animal activist, not an extremist, and the president of American Airlines, and he has said, I don't want any animal shipping on, they're basically only taking pets at this time. And it's just a misinformation thing. And United has gone pretty much that way. Delta's definitely that way. And I was sitting, during Cindy's presentation, I was sitting right next to their representatives, and I looked at them and I said, can't you do anything? And they said no, they really can't, because the people that are working with all the live animal cargo, they recognize the need for better information and education, but what it really gets down to is dollars and cents. The airlines don't want to take the chance of having a lawsuit and having to give out millions of dollars in a settlement. They don't like to deal with the negative social media, and it's just easier for the airlines to say no animals traveling. So really need a recognition for the need for travel, and also as it relates to lab animals. I know I'm working with Jackson Labs right now, and we've come up with a great program to make sure that those mice are kept in the right temperature, in the right conditions, quiet, throughout as much as they can control in the transportation process. In educating myself about this, I have really come to feel very passionately about the need for transporting lab animals, and I see how it's impossible. Air France is literally the only airline that will allow lab animals. So we do want responsible animal shipments, not ad hoc ones. Facilities I already talked about. We need to have continued industry focus, and unfortunately, probably we're going to have to get to further legislation at the federal level, but also I think at the state and local level. If we could start enforcing the requirements that almost every state has for vaccinations of animals, and if we could just enforce those at the airports, then the animals that are sick wouldn't get in. And it should be done before the shipment, not when the shipment arrives. It should be all taken care of before the shipment even starts. So I don't know if I have enough time, but I just wanted to show some happy tales, we call it. So we had capybaras come. These are some of our commercial segments: sloths, bunnies, goats. Goats actually have to be not pre-quarantined. They have to be allowed a rest stop for USDA to inspect them before. Anteaters, turtles. We actually see a lot of turtles, birds. So a lot of times they've been, the picture's not coming up good. A lot of times things have happened in transit or right when they arrive at JFK, and we've been able to help. One was a gentleman ships homing pigeons from Michigan, and he drives them to JFK, and then he ships them to South Africa, and they compete in a race in South Africa. So I think it's like 3,000 pigeons. And he drove all the way to the airport to JFK, and he was tendering them into the cargo facility, and they looked at their watch, he said, sorry, too late. Now he's got a car full of pigeons, no place to put them. And they ended up at our facility, and we were able to help him hold the animals, and so that they could, and then we actually did the tender to the cargo facility. But just to let you know what was at the ARC before, this was at JFK before we were there. It did have an animal care facility, but that's what it looked like, and that's our facility. Those were the kennels, and that's our kennel now. And that was the horse stable, and that's our horse stable. Another kennel. Anyway, thank you for having me. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to answer anything I can.